Hello, I am Erin Reed and I'm with Polaris MEP, and we are so pleased to have you all with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. Manufacturers in Rhode Island and across the United States, of course, are facing quite a number of challenges, and these include supply chain shortages and labor shortages and high operating costs. And digital innovation is actually one of the way that all manufacturing companies could address some of these issues and become more competitive. However, in Rhode Island, what we found is that many manufacturers are really unsure of the possibilities, or they're afraid of what they perceive might be the costs and how long it would take them to get some ROI on that. And some folks are, smaller. And so the idea of a digital transformation of the way their company has been functioning for a long time can be really overwhelming, despite the fact that at the same time, these manufacturers need to be developing new processes and new products so that they can be competitive. So, in November, there was a terrific Rhode Island Manufacturers Association B2B Expo. And I was thrilled because I got to hear two practitioners from CLA, CliftonLarsonAllen, speak to this very topic. And so I spoke with Dave Chenevert of Rhode Island Manufacturers Association and said, I think that we need to get them a larger audience. And then asked Mark Hall and Noel Hopkins if they'd be willing to repeat that presentation today. And thankfully, they said yes. So today you will hear from Mark and Noel of CLA. So Mark is the manager in CLA's tax strategies, federal tax strategies group. Is that right, Mark? Here in Rhode Island. And he focuses on helping manufacturing companies of all sizes maximize their research and development tax credit claims. And then Noel is the digital growth director for CLA. He's focused on identifying opportunities for CLA clients in the Northeast region where they can find valuable digital solutions that are addressing their biggest and most important problems. So Noel will actually lead off our webinar today, talking about digital innovation. And then Mark will come in and he'll discuss those tax credits that could help you fund or offset some of the funding of these investments. And then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So please toss your comments or questions in the chat box, and I will make sure that I lob them at our speakers right at the end of this agenda. So for those of you in the audience who have not worked with Polaris MEP, unofficial introduction of us, I am Erin Reed, and I'm the marketing lead for Polaris MEP. And our sole mission is to help small and medium-sized Rhode Island manufacturers increase their profitability, grow, compete. And that means that the way we do that is to deliver customized and affordable solutions for your top line, your bottom line, and your pipeline. It also means that we try really hard to serve as kind of a one-stop connection to resources here in Rhode Island and across the United States that can help you out. Because we are part of an MEP national network where there is one MEP in every state plus Puerto Rico, that means that we can really broaden the reach that we have to bring things back in and benefit our Rhode Island manufacturers. So like all the other MEP centers, we are measured by an impact that we have on our clients. So in order to be judged successful, we have to show that we've had that return through impactful work. And those economic impacts are typically measured in increased and retained sales, in jobs added and retained, and also in savings and new client investments. So again, I mentioned that we are part of an MEP national network, and the MEP in our name stands for Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So Polaris MEP works very closely with the other centers, including in Massachusetts. I know there are a few folks who have joined us today from Mass. And in Mass, we work with Mass MEP, which is our sister center. So we always connect people across that very soft border between our two states. Noel has not spent a heck of a lot of time in Rhode Island yet, I don't think, but as he visits more with clients, will learn that there are parts of Rhode Island that you can't get to without leaving Rhode Island, going into Massachusetts or Connecticut and coming back to Rhode Island. And so I think that that's a great way to kind of bring it back, is that no matter what, we got to come up with solutions that sometimes get us out of our borders and then back in. And that's really where we're talking today. So we are leaning into the P of Manufacturing Extension Partnership today, and I'm going to be quiet now and turn it over to our wonderful partners from CLA to talk about digital innovation.
Thank you so much, Erin. Good morning, everyone. It's so great to be able to connect with you all. As Erin said, my name's Noel Hopkins. I'm a Digital Growth Director at CLA. And for those of you who don't know CLA, CliftonLarsonAllen, we're a business that's been around for over half a century, with our roots firmly in accounting and audit. But today we're a professional services organization, and part of that organization helps businesses grow and develop. And we support clients of all industries, but our largest industry is manufacturing and distribution. So it's great to be here and talking to you all today. A little bit about CliftonLarsonAllen. We take a very industry-focused approach. And so one of the things that we pride ourselves on is having deep industrial expertise and really understanding your business and working with you in a collaborative way to help and provide you with value. And when we think about manufacturing today in particular, you don't have to look very far to understand some of the macro level challenges that manufacturers are facing today. We understand from talking with our clients, talking with the businesses we support, and from the broader information about the industry, that today many of the businesses in manufacturing are facing supply chain issues and complexity, growing workforce, labor shortages, and rising operating costs. And when we think about how we can help and support our clients, whether that's in any of the service lines that we provide, including digital, we think about how we can solve these key challenges. So what I'd like to do today is give you a few examples of how CLA and the digital group in particular is helping manufacturers optimize supply chain and inventory management, overcome labor shortages with automation and more efficient processes, and reduce and manage operating costs by driving efficiency through connecting data sources and leveraging the best technology out there. We'll then hand over to Mark, who will talk about some of the R&D tax credits that are available to manufacturers, which can be applied to help offset some of the digital initiatives that we'll talk about here today. And as Erin said, we'll have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So look forward to discussing and talking with you more about some of those the specific challenges. So if it's okay, I'm going to take a moment to talk about each one of these areas. And the best way to do this and to share with you what can be achieved is by using some real world examples. So I'm going to reference some use cases from out in the industry, more broadly, and then more specifically around clients that CLA has supported. Let's start with supply chain issues. And I know that on the call today, we have businesses of all different shapes and sizes. But I wanted to reference a use case here that is actually applicable to all businesses. I'm highlighting here an example from a very, very large manufacturer, Ford Motor Company, actually, who identified that in end of Q3 last year, they had about 40 to 45,000 vehicles sat in various inventory parking lots awaiting components before they could be delivered. That was an enormous amount of inventory, over $1.5 billion of vehicles sat waiting for components. And what that tells us is even the most sophisticated, some of the largest manufacturers in the world are facing challenges with supply chain issues and managing inventory effectively. And we see this through our client base today. Businesses large and small are having difficulty managing their supply chain, accurately forecasting demand, and that is resulting in higher operating costs, and it's limiting their ability to serve their customers. And one of the challenges we see here is that if inventory is not correctly managed, such that you don't have too much inventory taking up cost and effort and space. If you don't have enough, you're maybe not supplying your clients with products and services, which means that you may be losing market share and losing revenue. Next slide, please, Mark. We've worked with a number of clients on supply chain challenges and inventory management. One of the things that we see commonly in manufacturers of all sizes is that systems used to manage orders, inventory, production cycles aren't all connected and talking with each other. And we worked with a client in Connecticut last year who had an enormously complex inventory management system, different warehouses, suppliers and vendors providing inventory from different parts of the world. And what this resulted in is a ballooning of their inventory. They actually ended up with over $60 million of what they call dead stock. It's inventory that was not being processed and worked, but was sat in warehouses. And they also had final product that wasn't being shipped because it was waiting on other inventory, other parts. This is a great example of how by connecting key systems, order taking, production management, invoicing, and inventory management, and providing the management of the teams with data visualization through dynamic dashboards that they could access from their cell phones, from their laptops, meant that they could have up-to-date information and provide them with the ability to more accurately manage this inventory. Today, the inventory of this client is now being burnt down to pre-pandemic levels. They're reducing the inventory by about $50 million, so a huge reduction in inventory. But at the core of this challenge was data management. And so connecting disparate systems, providing data visualization and dashboards is an eloquent solution to a very complex problem and can help businesses drive down the cost of supply chain challenges in inventory management. Next slide, please, Mark. The biggest issue that manufacturers have faced in 2022 and continue to see in 2023 are labor shortages. There is an enormous amount of challenge in hiring and retaining talent to support manufacturing. And there's been a lot of articles written towards the back end of 2022 about how technology can be used to overcome some of these labor shortages. It's no longer considered that AI and machine learning and technology is putting jobs at risk. It's now considered that machine learning, AI, and technology is helping to support manufacturing and allowing our valuable resources to do the most valuable tasks. So if we can automate and make repetitive some of the most mundane tasks, we can free up our workforce to work on higher value tasks, which are more advantageous to them in their career development, higher likelihood of retaining talent, and reducing the overall cost base of operations. There are lots of examples of how we're using AI today. I was just talking to a client this morning about how we're leveraging AI to read invoices and process them into their accounting software automatically. Manual invoices coming via email, Document AI reads the invoices, captures the pertinent information, sends it to the accounting software, and does reporting, freeing up accounting and finance staff, freeing up those resources to go do more strategic planning and forecasting to help that company grow. On the next slide, Mark, I've got another example of how we're using AI. In this instance, we're using vision AI, computer vision, to identify manufacturing defects or augment quality control. The little animation here is not playing at the moment, but I think you get the idea from the image. This is an example we used on tennis balls, where we were able to identify accurately the number of tennis balls being put in each sleeve. This type of component counting and quality control today is very easy to automate with computer vision. Just 5 years ago, this type of computer model would have taken thousands of images to generate, an enormous amount of time and effort to employ and put on the shop floor. Today, we can develop these models very quickly with high levels of accuracy. And manufacturers of all types of components, not just the very high-tech products, are leveraging computer vision. The vision capability we see on the shop floor today is far more accurate than manual interpretation of defects and product quality. Manual inspections are inherently inaccurate, particularly over time as people fatigue and they start to miss defects and issues. Computer vision can be trained to be highly accurate and provide real-time data back to operation managers and production leaders. This helps optimize processes, reduce operating costs. So computer vision is something that every industry, every manufacturer should consider, especially if they're making many parts of the same type, where volume is one of the challenges, and growing the business through that volume is something that they find very important. Next slide, please, Mark. Just one more example of computer vision here. In this case, we're tracking workforce on a construction site, ensuring that folks aren't in the incorrect areas where there may be unsafe conditions, and also ensuring that they're wearing the correct PPE, in this case, a hard hat. Tracking workforce, customers, movement of parts are all great examples of computer vision. And the value is really extraordinary. Mark, if you go to the next slide, we've got an explanation of that value. So deploying and operating a computer vision system will actually cost less in most cases than the labor cost associated with doing those tasks. An operating a computer vision system is very low cost and very effective, and can be done at a lower cost than the actual hiring and maintaining of the individuals who would do that task manually. That in itself is a good value proposition, but where we get even greater value and where clients are seeing even greater results is in understanding the drivers for non-quality, things that drive scrap rate higher, how they might improve yield. The data that they capture from computer vision is able to help them make those informed decisions and actually improve their manufacturing process, drive efficiency. And the value there is even greater than the cost savings associated with augmenting or replacing manual inspection. So a really exciting value proposition for visual inspection. And I would encourage any manufacturer, if you haven't already explored this, to do so, because it's very surprising how effective and how low cost computer vision can be and implemented very effectively on shop floors. Finally, I'd like to talk more broadly about operating costs. There are lots of reasons why operating costs have increased over the last 12 months or so. Wages, material costs, energy bills have all contributed to operating costs increasing. There are things that we found effective in helping clients to manage those costs. And one of the things that manufacturers are seeing is the ability to more accurately predict and take action on maintenance. Unscheduled maintenance that happens at inopportune times, is highly expensive and drives more efficiency in manufacturing processes. By using data from equipment, computer vision, parameters from machinery, by installing sensors and better monitoring equipment, we're able to forecast downtime and equipment maintenance. And that allows our clients, our manufacturing businesses, to take maintenance steps at convenient times and locations, reducing the cost of the maintenance itself and also increasing the uptime of their equipment. Next slide, please, Mark. It's very customized approach we take to predictive maintenance. We know that equipment varies in its reasons for downtime. So we work very collaboratively with our clients to understand what maintenance actions are likely to be needed and how we might predict when they're going to be required. These drivers help us to improve operational uptime and drive maintenance into scheduled times, thus reducing the operational downtime of the equipment and improving the operating efficiency of the factories. We were also implementing more enterprise solutions to help implement predictive maintenance, computer vision, and inventory management. And so we partner with ERP solutions to help clients leverage enterprise level foundational platforms to manage their business. I'm more than happy to talk specifically to anyone on the call one-on-one about the type of enterprise software that we're able to implement and how that helps drive down operating costs for clients in manufacturing also. Next slide, please, Mark. So those are just 3 examples that we shared today around supply chain issues, labor shortages, and operating costs, and how we're using technology and data in particular to help clients reduce those challenges and overcome them as they look to grow their businesses. We have many more examples and many more ways in which we can help businesses with technology. And so please feel free, if there's something here that you'd like to learn more about, or you have any questions, to reach out to me directly. One of the exciting things we're seeing also is that these type of innovative solutions often allow clients to leverage R&D tax credits. So at this point, I'll hand over to Mark Hall, who's going to talk a little bit about the R&D tax credits and explain how and when you can access those. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Noel. And thank you, Aaron and Polaris MEP, for making this webinar happen. I'm doubtful we saved the best for last, a tax accountant talking about the Internal Revenue Code. But I'm grateful to be here with you today. And while everyone hates paying taxes, most love tax credits. So let's jump in. Again, I'm Mark Hall. I work in CLA's Federal Tax Strategies group, focusing on credits, incentives, and deductions. And one of the big ones is the R&D tax credit. So today I want to level set on the credit and make sure you're armed with enough knowledge to at least start asking the right questions about what qualifies and how the credit can benefit your company. If you're investing in the projects Noel just described, it's a fantastic way to recoup some of your investment and really maximize your ROI. Even if you're not yet, the credit almost certainly can still benefit your business because, as we'll see, the legislative intent of the credit is really to keep innovation and jobs here in the United States. And on just about every one of my slides, we'll discuss that intent and the breadth of the regulations as written and as interpreted. And at this point, we can be really confident in that interpretation because the credit has been around for a long time. Now, even though the credit is 40 years old, someone like me still spends a lot of time talking to clients who either haven't heard of it or are very confident they don't qualify. Now, part of the problem is a branding or a messaging issue, but one thing I want to convince you today is that your definition of R&D, the lab coats, speakers, PhDs, we have to expand that to include much of the time the business spends innovating to stay competitive. So we'll get to exactly what that means today. Quick refresher on tax credits generally. They're a dollar for dollar offset of tax liability. So not a deduction. It's a common misconception, but let's say you owe the IRS $100,000 in a given year, but you have a $50,000 R&D credit. In that year, you're actually going to pay the government only $50,000. A high level, back of the napkin way of estimating the potential credit. Your federal tax benefit is going to be about 7 to 10% of qualifying costs. So let's say we identify $1 million in eligible expenses. That'll yield a credit of about $70,000 to $100,000 in a given year. And we'll talk about those eligible costs shortly. Up here in the Northeast, we have to talk about state credits, as they can be as lucrative or more as the federal credit. If you're doing these types of projects in Massachusetts, you could also be eligible for the Massachusetts credit, which can be about as lucrative as the federal credit. This would offset your Massachusetts corporate excise tax. So we're mainly talking about big S corps and corporations, unless you're a life science company, and then the credit could be refundable. Rhode Island has an even more lucrative tax credit, but the key there is you must be a corporation. Before I lose everyone in the weeds here, CLA is big enough where people like me can spend all of our time in a really narrow area of the tax code. So very happy to discuss your specific fact patterns in the future. Recently, Congress managed to make the credit a bit smarter too. The big problem with tax credits, even those you can carry forward for 20 years, is that if you aren't profitable, you can't use the credits. And of course, which businesses need the most help with cash flow? Pre-revenue startups. So Congress created the payroll offset election to enable some businesses to offset the employer-paid FICA tax. Many more rules here, but generally, once you start generating gross receipts, you have 5 tax years to elect the credit to offset payroll taxes, so long as your gross receipts don't exceed $5 million in any given credit year. So a nice way to generate immediate cash flow for startup companies. It also made it so that eligible small businesses could use the credit to offset the alternative minimum tax. So just a few considerations to keep in mind if you don't think at first blush that you can utilize the credit. So I included more slides than I could cover today so that our National Tax Office could sign off on me sharing the presentation. If any of you want this deck, I'm happy to send your way. I actually believe Aaron will be sharing automatically with attendees who complete the webinar survey. But again, don't hesitate to reach out, especially if you're a startup company. All right, so here's where we really start to see the breadth of the legislative intent. The IRS's 4-part test is how we define R&D for Section 41 tax credit purposes. So basically where we meet each part of this test, we can qualify a project and the underlying activities and expenses. So this first prong here, permitted purpose or business component, I mean, think of this as the goal of a project designed to stay competitive in the marketplace. So what were you doing to innovate? It really doesn't have to be core new product development. So consider improvements to existing products or the constant iteration you're doing to your production line to become greener, leaner, and faster, etc. And doesn't have to be new to the world, just has to be new to you. Consider also the use of all the or conjunctions. So or for use in your trade or business. I mean, think digital and all the automation you're doing. The second prong, technological in nature. Here we're just checking that the underlying activities are grounded in the principles of the hard sciences, physics, chemistry, biology, computer science, plus engineering and the multitude of related disciplines there. Not our highest hurdle, so I wouldn't let this one prevent you from digging further. Third, there has to be some technical uncertainty at the outset or sometime during the project related to capability, method, or design. Capability uncertainty is pretty rare. We always use the example of those researching a cure for cancer. Probably the highest requirement of Section 41, but again, there's an or conjunction. So for methodology or design uncertainty, here we're looking to identify technical challenges associated with questions of how do we enhance this existing product, or what is the optimal design or architecture of this improved manufacturing process. And then once we identify one of those uncertainties, then we look for a process of experimentation to eliminate it. So this can be comparing alternative design or methodology solutions, some iterative process of development, gathering design requirements, ideation, whiteboarding, design, coding, we look at prototyping, testing, trials, and then any further iteration based on the results of that validation process. But basically, if you're undertaking technical steps to uncover those uncertainties and arrive at a performant product, process, solution, software, etc., then we might be able to satisfy this last prong of the test. So these are some specific examples taken from the regulations of activities that won't qualify. Won't linger here except to mention there's a boots on the ground test. So the activities must take place here in the United States, and for state credit purposes, often the claimed activities must take place within the borders of that given state. Research funded by a grant or contract. The word funded in this case is a highly loaded term. Please do touch base with CLA or another credit professional before automatically excluding. We actually qualify a lot of research and contract manufacturing after reviewing contracts to ensure the taxpayer, you in this case, maintains substantial rights to the research and is subject to the financial risk of the research if it fails. All right, so here's an important tab because you can really start to add up these costs in your head, multiply by 7 and 10%, and that'll give you your high-level credit estimate. In your industry, at least based on what I know of the attendees, the primary drivers of the credit are the wages you pay folks directly performing, supervising, and supporting development, and supplies used and consumed during the development process. So labor, this is time spent at every stage of the development lifecycle. Everything from ideation or gathering design requirements through trials and user acceptance testing. Also have to emphasize the direct supervision and direct support function, because most taxpayers don't know this. Direct supervision can be the time of VPs or even the C-suite directing or supervising development and product direction, or even sitting in on design meetings. Even the person taking the meeting notes in that meeting could qualify, which kind of leads me to the support function. Consider those cleaning up the lab or the production folks who run product and process validation trials. We even look at CapEx improvements, and often maintenance staff is heavily involved with validating new machines and other improvements on the production line. Might not be huge portions of their year, but you can start to see how this really adds up. Back to supplies used during development. Consider tooling costs so long as consumed in development and not depreciable. Raw materials used and consumed in development, prototype costs, trial materials. One expense that's really taking off are cloud hosting costs. So since we talked about digital, consider AWS, Google Cloud. To the extent you're moving your development environment and you're leveraging the cloud, those expenses could qualify. Contractors, these folks are receiving a 1099, but they can qualify to the extent they're doing the same things we just described for the internal folks. The big ticket items are development staff augmentation, or perhaps you don't have a specific testing or machining capability in-house, so you contract out that work. All right, so here's the development lifecycle visualized in a different way. Just wanted to point out a couple areas that might change how you view the two vertical bars. Generally, we're looking at expenses and activities incurred within the two vertical bars, but sometimes they're a little bit grayer than they first appear. So general market research won't qualify, but a technical sales lead in the marketplace, gathering feedback from customers, and then translating those design requirements into technical specifications, or acting as an interface between your customers and engineering team, that time could very well qualify. Also consider trials on the production line. So perhaps you have a new piece of equipment, a new recipe or a new line, or more likely just some process improvement. The key to qualifying that time in those materials is whether there was risk and uncertainty at the outset of the trial, not whether you end up selling the good. Now, once you've successfully completed a trial, you've sold the good, then we can probably say further iterations on that production line would not qualify. But again, happy to take a closer look and reevaluate to make sure we're capturing everything. All right, so the goal here is just to give you one slide to sit down with your engineering team to discuss. It's just a distillation of many years calculating research credits for your industry, and I hope covers just about everything that could come up during that conversation, but happy to facilitate that conversation offline. We could spend my entire allotment of time on this tab, but so two major trends that are affecting most of my current clients and making credits even more topical. You heard them already today. Labor shortages. Most of my clients can't hire everyone they need and can't afford many they do hire. So they're innovating to avoid raising prices and alienating their customers. So a lot of this revolves around digital like projects. So leveraging technology to become leaner and faster. If you're building out ERP systems, adding technology, developing existing software, adding robotics, please do talk to your tax accountant and make sure you're considering the R&D credit. Similarly, supply chain issues. Seems like these issues have been ironed out, and the cost of a shipping container looks more reasonable here now in 2023. But many of my clients still can't afford, basic raw materials. So even when they had a perfected manufacturing process or commercialized product recipe, they couldn't source the raw materials they need. So they looked at chemical equivalents and non-chemical equivalents, and oftentimes even the former pushed the recipe out of spec and caused issues with bad products and unhappy customers. So keep an eye out for raw material substitutions and validations, because often these new materials injected that uncertainty we look for back into operations and forced what were commercialized goods back into the lab or back into trial. All right, documenting your tax credits. So as with any lucrative tax incentive, it's critical that we're creating an audit trail and documenting exactly why you qualify. The key here is creating a nexus between a project that meets the 4-part test and the expenses incurred as part of that project. So think internal labor, supplies, and contractor expense. Detailed project or time tracking detail is the gold standard, but obviously those systems are expensive and time consuming to implement. So the IRS isn't going to penalize you if you don't have that level of detail. Most of my clients don't, most of CLAs don't. And we'll talk about ways we can help you leverage the information you do have to create a really strong credit report in support of the tax credit. We do have a pretty good idea exactly what they're looking for because of a recent Chief Tax Counsel memo. Basically, if we're looking to claim credits on already filed returns, so amend those returns and claim the credit, we now have to add an attachment demonstrating this nexus. So it's still possible to claim those credits we missed in the past, but a few hurdles we need to clear before submitting those claims. The reality is that CLA was already documenting most credits to this degree. So wanted to talk a bit today specifically about our process. It all starts with a no-cost scoping exercise. So we spend some time on the phone with you, learning about the business and your development activities. We educate you on the credit rules, and then we ask for some basic costing detail. So think employee listings with job titles and wages, maybe some GL and account detail or invoices to help us document some supply expenses and third-party contractor expense. And then once received, we aggregate everything and run through a credit model that yields an estimate of the credit benefit and the estimated cost on our part of quantifying and documenting the credit. And then you decide if the juice is worth the squeeze and if you want to move forward with us. Been doing these a while, and the ROI is almost always very attractive to clients. If you do choose to move forward, then we leverage the detail already provided and send out a comprehensive information request, basically starting with the wide end of the funnel, trying to capture everything that qualifies. And from there, we start drilling down on specific projects and expenses. So we'll interview project managers and engineers, documenting how specific projects meet the 4-part test and how much time of a given engineer's year was spent on qualified research activities. We create nexus between expense detail and those projects and ultimately aggregate all of the costing detail into our credit model. And then that credit model spits out the credit, and we then work to ensure that the credit is filed correctly on the tax return. Whether that means working with a CLA tax team or your own existing provider. The latter is actually very common because many small shops don't have the time to keep up with every code section and might not know much about the credit. While all of the quantitative part of this piece is happening, concurrently, we're working on a procedural memo and project narratives and project matrices as well as contemporaneous project documentation as part of our audit-ready credit report. So again, this ultimately describes in great detail why you're eligible for the credit. And in most cases, we send this report to you at the conclusion of a project, and no one ever ends up looking at it. That's in the good case. While audits are very rare, it does become the first line of defense, and in most cases serves as the end of the inquiry, because the IRS has to focus on the low-hanging fruit, and our goal in the deliverable is to give them ample evidence that their efforts are better directed elsewhere. So in sum, CLA's digital team can help you leverage technology and innovate to meet today's many challenges. And our FTS team is here to make sure you're taking advantage of all available federal and state incentives designed to help you finance that innovation. Thank you so much for your time today. If anyone has any questions, I know we save some time for Q&A. Also very happy to talk offline when convenient for you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Noel. Yeah, that was really, really interesting. And I have to say, from Polaris MEP side, because our manufacturing advisors work with smaller manufacturers on so many different things, right? Helping them kind of think through solutions. I was fascinated by how a lot of what you guys both said really kind of goes back to one of the trainings we do, which is PDCA, plan, do, check, act. Both of you kept kind of talking about those as stages, right? The plan, the do, the check, the act, in order to make sure that you'd laid the groundwork with documentation to get the credit, or that you'd really set up the experiment properly, right? With the digital to get the most out of a new piece of technology. So really interesting. So I did get one question, and I think it was originally for Mark, but I'm going to put it to both of you. And it said, we are a small company, don't have a lot of people. Who do we have to involve in planning a project like this?
In terms of internally or through an external provider?
So I guess they're thinking about how they'd pull in their own team members for that. So for Mark, you said that like there's a lot of scoping requirements, right? Who would be involved kind of from the tax credit documentation? Who would you think are critical to get involved if you're thinking about planning a digital innovation that would qualify for those credits?
Sure. So usually your tax accountant can help you guide the way, but we spend most of our time talking with CFOs or controllers to start. They're going to be the ones that are knee deep in the GL detail, the expense detail. They're going to be able to tell us this contractor was doing R&D, but they were doing it in Turkey, so we can't take that time. But this contractor was doing work in Rhode Island, so we're going to claim a credit on his time. And then once we gather all that information, then we start to talk to more technical folks. And sometimes that can be the CEO, if whatever the product is or whatever the business is, if it's his or her brainchild, it might be him. He might be able to provide us all the technical information we need. But oftentimes it could be a CTO, it could be an engineering manager. Sometimes we get on these calls where we document projects, and just to use software, for example, I like to have a project manager to get a real high level overview of the project, exactly what you were trying to accomplish, that permitted purpose. Then I want someone like a software developer who's really in the weeds, can give me the technical detail that I know is going to wow the IRS. And then I like to have someone from QA, so we can talk through some of the things they discovered that basically led us all the way back to the beginning of the development process. So what were some of the bugs or complex issues that they ran into that they had to iterate around to ultimately arrive at a performance solution?
Really cool. How about you, Noel? If you were going to address this for small teams that don't have a lot of people, who's important to pull in when you're doing that kind of scoping and planning? And
yeah, great question. I think it's important to have the key stakeholders, right? So we always like to talk to the folks who are going to either use the solution or impacted by the solution directly. And that scoping or that initial sort of collaboration might just be a 1-hour discovery call where we get to understand what the problem is, how we might solve it, and how we'll know if we've solved it, what the results will be. So often we start with a very simple discovery call. It can be virtual, it can be in face-to-face meeting, just to kind of figure out what there might be we can do. And we're always happy to run those calls. And there's not a fee associated with them. It's more of our commitment to getting to know businesses and how we might be able to help them.
Right, really interesting. So the next question I see kind of they went through was regarding, I think what you were talking about kind of, Noel, with predictive maintenance.
Yeah.
And so the person says, we're already doing maintenance. What obstacles should I expect to get up to predictive maintenance?
Well, it's fascinating because often there are indicators, early warnings that equipment is going to require maintenance. So if we can work with businesses to identify what those early warning indicators might be, and pull them into some data models, we can provide a maintenance schedule that is far more based on the condition of the equipment rather than just routine downtime. And if we can pull as much maintenance into scheduled intervals, the additional uptime manufacturers will see is very significant. So I think, again, it's a very collaborative approach we take here to understand what equipment's being used, what type of data we might be able to pull from that equipment. And often folks are surprised with what data is available and what sort of intelligence we can derive from there. So I would encourage anyone looking at predictive maintenance and predictive analytics to not be too dissuaded by the thought that maybe they're not quite ready or maybe they don't have the data. Let's take a look, because often we're surprised and our clients are surprised at what they can achieve.
You're right. There's a big question there. I mean, everybody talks big data, but when you're a small shop, that just feels like, well, I'm not even part of the conversation, right? I can't be part of the conversation.
Yeah, it can be a scary thing to dive into, but many clients start with very simple processes and small amounts of data and make incremental improvements. And it's to Mark's point on ROI, the return on investment is so significant, it's definitely worth exploring.
I was stunned actually when I saw that chart that you did about the visual inspection systems and the ROI of that. Tiny cost, giant possible side benefits. I mean, like, that was really very impressive, and sustainable benefits, which is a nice thing, right? To invest once and then
if you can, that's right. If you can move the needle a few percentage points on yield or reduction in scrap, the return is very significant. It's just bottom line operating efficiency improvements. So that's where it gets really exciting, when we can start to leverage the data to make better decisions and reduce scrap, improve yield.
All right, Mark, this next question is for you. You ready?
Ready.
We have received a state innovation grant. I think they might be thinking about the Commerce Innovation Voucher Program, right? So we have received a state innovation grant. Does this mean we cannot also get federal tax credits?
I don't believe so. Happy to dig more into your specific fact pattern, but do want to bring it back to the funded research I mentioned. There are two main prongs there we have to be careful of. So first, do you retain some, it doesn't have to be exclusive, but some right to use the research you generate using that grant money in the future? If you do, we can kind of move to the second prong. And that prong asks us, well, is there substantial risk to performing this research? If the research fails, do you not get the grant money? If you don't, I think we could make the argument that that research is at risk, and so we would want to claim that time, even though it is funded. Oftentimes what I see, though, even if a portion of the activities conducted under a specific grant or project or SOW don't qualify, there might be a portion of those activities that do qualify. There might also be internal research you're doing, kind of peripheral to that agreement, that could qualify as well. I hope that
Sounds
helps.
like there's a lot of opportunities to stack. I shouldn't say stack, but to take advantage of both state and federal to make this investment that much even more appealing.
Absolutely. you can definitely
Absolutely.
stack state and federal.
All right. Well, I will say one of the things that struck me when you were talking, Mark, is the idea that it doesn't have to be new. It has to be new to you. And especially, I know we have a couple of folks who are actually from food manufacturing companies here in Rhode Island on the line today. And so, you know, that often is not something where they're not inventing a whole new type of, you know, tomato, but they are trying to figure out a way to better process that tomato to get to the yield that they need. So that was a really good thing. All right, I'm going to ask the last question. And if anybody else has something, please go ahead and throw it into chat. But it's because I spent 15 years specializing in marketing to older adults before moving over to manufacturing. And quite frankly, many of the folks that are part of our quote unquote workforce challenge is that we have folks who are aging out, right? And I wondered, Noel, if you could speak a little bit to how some of the digital things help with that element of the workforce challenge, that idea that somebody's aging and we still want to retain them, or we want to move their expertise and skills into a new area. Is that something you guys think about with these digital improvements?
Yeah, it is. When we think about those really experienced, highly knowledgeable folks who are in industry, there's two things that businesses are trying to manage. One is the knowledge that those folks carry with them and how to better disseminate that across the organization. As folks work in an industry over time, they gather an enormous amount of what might be called tribal knowledge and information about processes and systems, how to manage the facility. We're working with clients today on knowledge management to help disseminate that, capture it in an effective way that makes it useful for the majority of the workforce. And the other thing is those folks who are looking towards retirement often think about how they can improve their sort of quality of life. And so automating some of the more manual, repetitive, mundane things they do is a way to kind of create a role for them that means that they're happy and enthusiastic to stick with a business to help drive some of those automation changes and maintain their sort of consultant knowledge and experience. So I think those are two areas that we've seen clients are interested in exploring digital for that knowledge retention and maintaining, you know, those folks who are valuable to the business.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I can see how they'd be especially helpful when Mark's pulling his team together to find out, right, what are we going to be doing as our tests and where is the uncertainty? If you've had 20 years at a company, you know where we need to test, you know where we need to improve, but you may not be sure exactly how. So that's really great. Well, Mark and Noel, I cannot thank you enough for coming and sharing with us today, both some solutions that people thought that they might not even be able to entertain, and also solutions where they might have thought that they were priced out of it simply by virtue of their size or what they were looking at. You know, we don't have to reinvent a new molecule, but we do need to find a better way to manufacture that helps us position our company for success. So as we said, this is about the P in partnership. Polaris MEP would love to be able to help you, connect you to CLA or other partners as you look to improve your business. And we would like to thank you all for your time, your great questions, and most importantly, thank Mark and Noel for sharing their expertise today. Thanks very much. We'll be talking to you soon.